Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, September 18th, 2024. First item of business on the agenda today is consideration of the minutes from the July 17th, 2024 meeting. If there's no additions or corrections, we'll entertain a motion to approve as written.
So moved. Second.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, minutes are approved. Next up, we'll have our administrator report from Deputy Administrator McDaniels.
Mr. President, members of the council and the mayor, good afternoon. In no specific order, since July 2024, we have filled one of three vacancies within our central staff. Ms. Kidd, in consultation with the City Council's leadership, is looking to fill the remaining positions before the end of this calendar year. We're wrapping up the first quarter of this year, and we have approximately 47 transactions that have been paid or that are being processed at this time. Including salaries and benefits, we have expended less than 10% of our annual budget. So that's just a gentle nudge. If we could speed up the transactions where we are based on this point in the year, ending the third quarter. Maybe with the exception of Councilor Abbott, who's directed central staff to reprogram all of our FY24 transactions for this fiscal year. Most other councilors are reviewing and or discussing funding opportunities with schools and nonprofits and neighborhood associations. So if you could give that another look. Birmingham Promise. This is week 2 of a 12-week period for which we'll have the Birmingham Promise students. They seem to be acclimating into the city very well. We have been able to collect data from them to include, knowing more about their families, their backgrounds, their interests. We want to thank our partners across the city who've assisted us by spending time with them, either within their department or in some aspect throughout the city. I do want to say that to make them eligible for the use of their likeness and or to travel in a city-owned vehicle, we have a consent form. To my knowledge, I don't have a hard count, but I think we have 6 of 8 of the consent forms signed from the students' parents, and we'll be sharing those with you for your records. We have continued to engage the administration with revisions to Executive Order 2077, which is the revised travel procedures. We are asking the administration to utilize more adaptive tools that can be not necessarily punitive to employees, but that will help to save costs and that are reasonable. So some examples of that, just so it won't be any maybe ambiguity about that. Short-term rentals. We know that there are employers, city governments included, who are allowing the use of short-term rentals. Or a travel agency who helps employees reduce their upfront costs for conference registrations and or booking a hotel of comparable use that we're currently using. So those are some options, and I think the administration is still considering those items as we speak here today. Constituent complaints. This is not necessarily a complaint or concern, but as you may know, the city of Birmingham is one of 3 recipients to receive the Center for Community Progress Technical Assistance Grant. 2 of your colleagues, Councilors Clark and Smitherman, are actively working with planning, engineering, and permits, as well as other departments and the Center for Community Progress to expand the city's efforts to address vacant and distressed properties. I'm familiar with that based on maybe the recent call for an on-site visit that Councilor Smitherman and Clark were a part of. FY25 legislative session. Currently, 54 pre-filed bills dating back to June of this year have been filed. 44 of those bills are House bills. 10 are Senate bills. I've provided copies of 3 particular bills for your use, which I think may be of interest. One is a recurring bill that has already been shared with you, filed by Senator Barfoot. as it relates to the appointment of local police chiefs. This bill would authorize the Attorney General or the Governor to appoint an interim police chief of certain municipalities. Senate Bill 6, this is something that could definitely affect us. It deals with local library boards. Senator Elliott is the senator who filed the bill. This bill will provide for local library board members to serve at the pleasure of the respective appointing authority, but by a 2/3 vote, that individual or individuals can be removed from the library board. Another one that's been a big issue, I know this form of a bill in the past has been of concern to the mayor as well as the city. This one in particular is House Bill 36, Simplified Sales Use Tax. I think if the record reflects, Birmingham's disbursement of simplified sales tax last year was $16 million. This bill in particular would add an additional sales use tax to be distributed amongst the participating municipalities. Can't assess if it's good or bad for us, but again, it could compromise what Birmingham is currently collecting. Council travel, events, and invitations. The Birmingham Bowl Game kickoff event is scheduled for Thursday, October 17th at the B&A Warehouse. Today is the deadline to RSVP, if you have not already. The Birmingham Business Alliance Leadership Exchange trip to Raleigh, North Carolina is scheduled September 30th through October 1st. The registration should be completed on or before this Friday, September 20th. To my knowledge, I think the only two have either responded or confirmed is President O'Quinn and Councilor Clark. Right. The League of Municipalities Standing Committee, this may be old news, but you should have received a notice for the Standing Committee meetings in Montgomery on Wednesday, October 9th. If you have not received that notice, it should be forthcoming. That meeting will be at Fraser Memorial United Methodist Church from 9 to 1 o'clock. National League of Cities City Summit is scheduled for November 13th through the 16th in Tampa, Florida. If you have not initiated travel plans, please see Connie Horn as soon as possible. We have been informed that because of this being the centennial year of NLC existence, a large number of conference attendees, attendees and guests are expected. The point with that is some conference hotels have shuttles, and if you don't make your conference lodging reservations sooner than later, you may end up being placed at a hotel that does not have a shuttle to the convention center. That concludes the administrator's report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions for Mr. McDaniels? Councilor Abbott.
I just wanted to ask if you could send the report to us before the meeting so we could follow along with what you're saying in case we can't understand you. Thanks.
And I can send it afterwards. I can send it now.
Good, thank you.
Okay. All right. Next up, we have an update on the Ramsey McCormick and Masonic Temple redevelopment projects. We have with us Mr. Irv Henderson of Henderson and Company. You all know that this city's in a agreement with Historic District Development Partners, or I think I got that right, Historic District Developers to redevelop those two properties. So it's been a little while since we've gotten an update. So I asked Mr. Henderson to come and join us today. Attorney King?
So, Council, it's my recommendation that we go into executive session under Alabama State Code 3625A 7A3 to discuss the ramifications in pending litigation.
Okay. We have a motion for executive session.
So,
All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. We'll reconvene at the call of the chair. Staff's got your slide presentation relative to the Masonic Temple queued up. All right, so we'll get started with that. You hit the button on the mic there, so you'll see the red light come on. Yep, there you go.
Great, thank you. Yes, if the deck is up, could we have now, where would you all see it? Okay, great. Yeah, so next slide, please. I wanted the counselors to see pictures of us having one of our vendors place motion-sensitive cameras on the building with solar power, because we have, unfortunately, the building has unfortunately been the victim of tremendous vandalism. We boarded up every window on a Monday, and on Tuesday, they had broken in again. And I would say this is the fourth or fifth time we've done the boarded up windows. So what we said is we've got to get some form of security. So we had a security firm basically design solar-powered cameras that are internet-based, where the reports and the alarms go to our folk and also go to the security firm that then brings in the police. We met with the police and asked for more surveillance of the area. And we also met with the neighbors and asked them to help us as we could spot people, who were breaking in. The idea is we want to just protect what's there and not have it hurt anymore before total restoration happens. The best security for a building of this type and for all historic buildings that we found from around the country is to have them live and active. And that will help the entire historic district. It is the redevelopment of the Masonic Temple, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge for the Free and Accepted Masons of Alabama. It is the intent of the redevelopment of the whole area to start with this gem. If that is the case, we feel that all of the rest of the historic district will be redeveloped, and we will have the commerce and the residency downtown that is needed to help transform that district. Next slide. This is what the cameras themselves look like. You'll notice the photovoltaic cells receiving the solar power that keeps the cameras running. Next slide. And so the firm that did this was a minority firm. They did a great job, and they will maintain the system for us. And, we are paying for this service on a monthly basis. President O'Quinn and councilors, we wanted to give you an update on where the progress of the redevelopment of the building is. Next slide. So we are applying to a discretionary fund with the Ford Foundation, and we will be presenting to them as soon as we can actually get their permission to do a presentation. We did go after $670,000 for archiving and exhibits and received that award from A.W. Mellon. The architect was Lord Egg Sargent. They are the most prominent historic architectural firm in the South, and we're pleased to announce that all of the plans are finished. So we have everything that is required to go to the city for planning and zoning approval, and we will work on that. We also recommend an overlay planning district for this entire area, and we have promoted the concept of a micro mesh hot spot zone for the entire area. That way, you would have the ability for vendors to make recommended commercials and coupons to people as they just walk through the district. And you would also have folk who would be able to do different kinds of businesses that are internet-based because they would be in a multi-block hotspot. We think those kind of things will make a tremendous difference for the whole district. We're applying to the Environmental Protection Agency for brownfields help. The Masonic Temple is a brownfield. There will need to be a great deal of asbestos remediation there, and we're prepared to move that ahead. We also wanted to announce that the greenhouse gas reduction funds with Calvert, that Councilor Clark mentioned earlier, will be a part of this building. And the debt for the Masonic will be based on the lower interest rates that we can get from the greenhouse gas reduction funds. We will probably have the same situation where some debt will have to be done in conjunction with the new markets in order for us to get new markets. So here, we want new markets, historic federal, historic state. And those things will lead to the funding for the entire building. The state historic tax credits, which you all know in Alabama, is a very, very hot commodity. Those tax credits have been secured from the state. We applied, we received them, and we then paid the fees to receive the actual credits themselves. And we're working with several different institutions that are very interested in being the state historic tax credit investor. Now, I did want to point out to you that, and if you go to the next slide, I did want to point out that currently the Community Development Financial Institution Fund has indicated that this area is no longer eligible for new market tax credits. So we are working to fight that, because whenever that is changed, because the income of the area has gone up, they always give a grandfathered period of time where you can finish any project that is underway. So that's what we're hoping to get, but we're also suggesting to the fund that they not change the status of the area, because as I think you all know, there are plenty of commercial structures that are historic and that are eligible for new markets normally that are still needing to be redeveloped in the historic district. And we'll work with Congresswoman Sewell on this for sure. So actually, I'd like to stop there, President O'Quinn. The only other materials I had, we were going to certainly remind you all that the Masonic Temple was highlighted during the Main Street America conference that was here. I am the Audit and Finance Chair for the National Board of Main Street, and I was the Master of Ceremonies for the opening plenary for Main Street. And we made sure that we highlighted the Masonic Temple, and the visitors were very interested in our continuing development. There were funders in those visitors, philanthropic funders, bank funders, and investor funders. So that was very, very important. The last piece, of course, in terms of the Masonic Temple, is we've also made sure that the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund is well aware of the importance of this building. You will soon hear about an Urban Land Institute project and program that will be built around the building. And as I told President O'Quinn, we will give you all information about that event, but we are inviting national speakers to come and talk about the historic district, preservation in Birmingham, and how important it is to the economic development of the entire city of Birmingham. I'll stop right there.
Okay, thank you. Just give me your 30-second elevator pitch on why this building is important.
I appreciate the question. The Masonic Temple, the official name, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the Free and Accepted Masons of Alabama, was designed by Robert Robinson Taylor, the first African-American certified architect in this country, the first graduate of MIT's architectural school. And designed in 21, completed in 1924, we have a 100-year-old historic structure that has connections to all of the important civil rights events. As you all know, when the state shut down the NAACP, there were other offices created by Reverend Shuttlesworth, and they were first located in the Masonic Temple. Ruby Shore had offices in the Masonic Temple. When Bull Connor had the issues with the marchers and people were injured, they returned to the Masonic Temple for first aid. Some of the first attorneys, some of the first dentists, at one time there were 6 dentist offices in the Masonic Temple, but the attorneys, the dentists, and the physicians established their practices here. During this time, the Masons were providing life insurance. They were providing small business loans. The Masons want to see all of this activity returned, and they want this to be the gem of the historic district. One of your most prominent preservationists has said that the Masonic Temple, one of your most prominent preservationists from Birmingham, has said that the Masonic Temple is the most important historic preservation item in the city at this time. We heartily agree.
Right, and it's also in the footprint of the National Historic Monument, is it?
Absolutely.
Correct?
It is a contributing facility to the national monument that was approved by President Obama literally just before he left office, 2 days before he left office.
Councilor Clark.
And please include the jazz legacy in your elevator pitch. And I just want to ask, do you envision preserving the Atlanta Life neon sign? I think it's still on the building.
We absolutely have to do all of the signage that was existing during the period of significance.
Oh, you would have to
Has to be returned.
You would have to recreate it or preserve what's left.
It has to be either
Oh, that-
restored
Yeah.
or recreated in a facsimile version of
Okay.
exactly what was there. But once again, Counselor, you are correct. I was very remiss not to mention the jazz history. As we all know, everybody from, Count Basie to Duke Ellington, to, Lena Horne, Cab Calloway, all of these famous musicians toured here. And in fact, we even still have, we have ticket stubs, we have signage from posters that were done. We have a lot of the memorabilia and the ephemera from when it was such an important music destination. And of course, the Grand Ballroom will be returned as a venue for music, for spoken word, for lectures. It will have state-of-the-art audiovisual equipment, and the design of the restoration has been done to augment the ability to have these events, because it's all about the economic development of the area. It is important to highlight that that kind of hospitality service with music and all those other arts also provides plenty of job opportunities for those who are looking for entry-level jobs, those so-called accessible jobs that we talk about. There will be plenty of them provided by the events that will be in the Masonic. And we expect it to return as a place for wedding receptions and birthday celebrations, bar mitzvahs, everything that was done there before. So I appreciate your mentioning that, because I should have said that.
Yep.
So you mentioned you mentioned the ballroom coming back, and I guess there will also be offices. Are there any other uses?
Yes,
plan?
absolutely. We have a restaurateur that is interested in creating a white tablecloth restaurant. There is an open office operator that wants to operate an entire floor. The Masons themselves will have 3 individual lodges. And I'd also be remiss not to mention the leadership of Grand Master Corey Hawkins and his executive secretary, Mr. Dennis Sims. They have done, Mr. Dennis Simmons, they have done a great job in helping make this happen, and they will be a very important part going forward. And eventually, there will be a property manager and an operator that will make sure the building is well-maintained and run well. And that will not be us, that'll be another party.
Okay. I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much. I appreciate you giving us an update.
Well, thank you, sir, and we're glad to come back and give subsequent updates whenever you'd like.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, at this time, we're gonna get an update on the status of the proposed short-term rental ordinance. Ms. Spurl and Attorney Bernard. So, y'all will have to forgive me. I actually forgot that we had talked about this at the July Committee of the Whole meeting. So hopefully this portion, of this Committee of the Whole will be shorter, because you have, at that July meeting, we had the basic, outline of the ordinance, presented to us. So you guys can kind of like hit the highlights and then talk about the most recent changes that, you have proposed. And let me say this, like, so this is a hot topic. There was a zoning advisory committee meeting last night, and I left here at 10:30. It started a little after 6:30. So lots of speakers, at least 2 hours of people offering 3 minutes comments each, and then the committee commissioners had a bunch of questions too. So I wanted to have this on the agenda again because, you know, there's a lot of people who feel very strongly, one way or the other, about this topic. So I think it's important for us all to be pretty well informed before this gets to the council agenda. But that being said, this is strictly informative. Not seeking for us to take any action. This still has to go to the Planning and Zoning Committee. So it'll be up to the Planning and Zoning Committee to make a recommendation or not, or otherwise advance it to the full council. All right, Ms. Spurl.
My name is Kim Spurl. I serve as the Natural Hazards Administrator in the Department of Planning, Engineering, and Permits. So just to add on to what Council President O'Quinn said, the original draft that we presented at the Zoning Advisory Committee and to this group in July, the zoning allowed short-term rentals as permitted with conditions, and the conditions were that they must meet the requirements of the city code section that we've also written. And so we received a good bit of feedback in July from short-term rental property owners and neighborhood residents. And so with our second draft, we attempted to kind of merge those comments to meet in the middle. And so that's what the documents you guys have in front of you today are. We actually added some language for some more restrictions and regulations for the permit. We strengthened that section. And then for the zoning component, in the single-family residential districts, we proposed that short-term rentals would only be allowed by special exception. And a special exception is run through our Zoning Board of Adjustment. So a short-term rental property owner would have to submit all of their materials that are required for the permit as part of that application. When our office would receive that application, it's our policy to notify the neighborhood association. It's up to, when I say we notify the neighborhood association, we notify the officers. So typically, the officers will either include the ZBA request on their monthly agenda. Some hold a special called meeting to address the request. And then some of our neighborhoods have advisory committees that will meet and make a recommendation for the neighborhood. So for the ZBA process, once the neighborhood completes one of those actions and they provide their comments regarding the request to our office, we would then place it on the agenda for the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The Zoning Board of Adjustment, they have three functions that they review. They review modifications, variances, and special exceptions. So this would be a special exception. The language that they would be responsible for adhering to is that this use, if approved, would not tend to impair the health, safety, or welfare of the public. Variances have their own set of standards, and then modifications have different standards. So the special exception is actually related to the use, and it's not something that you're getting a variance or modification from. So the zoning board would hold a public hearing. The neighborhood officers would be notified of the public hearing, as well as adjacent property owners for the property in question. So then the ZBA, they are a quasi-judicial board, so their decision is final unless an aggrieved party would appeal to circuit court. So that's kind of how that process would work. And we included that because we heard from quite a few of the neighborhood residents that they would like to be a part of the process. And so we thought this would be a good way to include them, to get their feedback, but still allow the short-term rentals to maneuver through the process. Did you want to add anything, Julie? So, yeah, if you guys have any specific questions, we'd be happy to answer them. ZAC did meet for 4 hours last night. We had some great feedback, a lot of questions and comments. And then the next step in this process would be to attend the Planning and Zoning Committee.
Okay, and the ZAC did vote last night and did not approve, they did not vote in favor of a recommendation to approve. Is that, am I saying that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
they originally made a motion just to send it without a recommendation, and then it was amended to send it with a no recommendation.
okay.
And I will say, I think our ZAC members, some of their questions were more about the state, how the regulations, how the balancing will be between if the state has any regulations and we have regulations. And so that's where some of their a lot of their questions came up.
All right, Council Williams?
I was just wondering what the reason was that they had a recommendation of no, but it was because of that.
That was one of the reasons they discussed.
I think, so my take on it as an observer was that they had lots of questions about, you know, the mechanics and they, you know, even though their decision is only on the zoning portion of this and not on the code portion, the ordinance portion, they still had a lot of questions about the code portion and, you know, wanting to know about, okay, how can this feasibly be implemented? That was one concern. Another concern is about enforcement. They had also questions about, you know, existing short-term rentals and, you know, there's this real open question about is it a commercial use or is it a residential use? And there's some case history apparently that at least says that it's says it's a residential use, and it doesn't say that it's not a commercial use.
Yes.
So,
Counselor, if I may clarify that, Julie Bernard, I serve as Assistant City Attorney in the Office of City Attorney. I think there's been a lot of confusion because there's a nuance to that question. It depends on how you're asking the question. So we've never said they are not a business, but by the same token, a long-term rental in a residential neighborhood is also a business.
it's a business, but it's a residential use.
Correct. That's the case that I've discussed, looked at what was occurring within the property. And they were saying people are doing normal residential things when they rent that particular property. They're not running a restaurant or selling T-shirts or building boats or, anything like that at the property. The property itself is being used. Now, the commercial transaction maybe, the rental may not even take place at the properties. In the case of most of the short-term rentals, we know those transactions take place on the internet. So it depends on how you ask the question. We've never said they aren't a business, but then when you ask about how the property's being used. Now, we do know that there are cases where they are rented for activities that, although you can have a party at your house, you can have your family over, you can have parties, you can have your bridal shower at your house or whatever in a normal residential area, they are being rented in some cases just purely for the fact of having a party. And that, in fact, that's prohibited by several of the platforms. They have, clear things about that. So there's a difference. They are not intended to be event centers. When they start being used as an event center, that's an issue. So again, it's a very nuanced question, and I just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah, so Council Williams, what I was trying to get to was, I think my take is that the zoning advisory committee didn't understand, couldn't get the clarity that they wanted to get to a place to where they felt like, they understood it. So not understanding it, I think they elected to vote to not recommend it.
Okay, so my second question, which is more on the legal side, Ms. Bernard, is if, it's been widely reported that when there is a party, and I'm going to speak in generics because apparently some of this has happened where we have active investigations for criminal activity, but when there is a party and the owner of the Airbnb sees on the cameras that there's a party, tries to evict them, kick them out, terminate the agreement or whatever we're calling the rental, and they ask BPD to respond, BPD's response is this is a civil matter. This is not an enforceable matter from the perspective of BPD. That's been widely reported as their response every time. So how does this ordinance create it a criminal matter instead of a civil matter so that BPD can physically remove the residents or the renters, whatever we're calling them?
And we have in the various meetings that we've had different hosts have reported in different areas, different responses. And that's what we're hoping with having an ordinance that shows that, they require a permit, parties aren't allowed, all of this, the regulations that we're putting in, that gives something that the police can refer to as a municipal ordinance violation versus just a contract between them, giving some more clarity. Most of what happens that, would generate these kinds of complaints are things that are enforceable under existing ordinances as it is, noise and, all that kind of stuff. So, but this, would give the police something more that they understand across the board.
Is it constitutional under the state constitution to have a actually a criminal piece to this where it is a misdemeanor to throw a party in a short-term rental? Where charges can be filed by a responding officer? You don't have to answer right now,
Yeah.
because there's obviously some research.
There's some
that has to-
questions,
that has to
there's some
go into
issues I
that.
would rather discuss in executive
But
session if we do
You
that.
know, one thing that I have seen from the cases that have been problematic from short-term rentals is, well, one thing that's problematic from the city's perspective is that BPD's shown up before something bad happened, and then something bad happened. So I really, and we all know that there's two large problems with short-term rentals, right? That we have on one side, we have residents that don't like it, even if there are respectful short-term rental tenants or whatever, renters. But there's also the other problem of party houses and drug houses and whatever else people do and nefarious activity in these that is more egregious, obviously, than just the hassle of the extra cars on the street. So I really want to see an ordinance where, we have a noise ordinance. I'd love to see stats on its enforcement, and I'm not gonna even ask for it to be pulled because I think I know the stats. So I would like to see, if we have an ordinance like this, something where a responding officer can say, well, you gotta show up in municipal court for this party.
Right, yes, that's correct. I mean, any
Just
municipal
because
ordinance violation.
Just because you have rented something in this zoning, a short-term rental, and you need to show up, I mean, it's the same thing as the noise violation.
Right, any municipal ordinance violation.
Yeah, a
is
municipal ordinance
prosecutable in municipal court. There are a few things, I mean, we've included things about requiring, exterior cameras and requiring noise meters. A lot of hosts have done that. Now, that's not going to be something that's going to be easy, that's not really for direct enforcement by the city, but that's a layer of information that we can have if we have to get to a revocation. So, that kind of thing. So there's some mixed things built in to explain.
That's my concern, can't for this until
Okay. Yes, Counselor Abbott.
I have a whole bunch of questions. And I was going to comment because I attended the meeting last night too, and I heard different things from what you heard, so I'm going to tell what I heard. What I heard them say was that all of the surrounding municipalities have denied these things in residential zone districts to protect their residents. But Birmingham, for some strange reason, we don't believe in protecting our residents, and we just let people do anything they want. So that means they're all going to be in Birmingham soon because the other entities don't allow them. I don't think we did not hear last night about any municipalities that have legalized them. What we heard about is there are a number of them where they are because they got in before and there were no answers about how they could get rid of them, or if anybody was trying to get rid of them. Another concern that I heard is enforcement. How in heaven's name are we going to get anybody to enforce anything? Because we know we don't have enforcement now, except to a very small degree because we don't have enough people doing enforcement. So we have some, and they work really hard, but who's coming out? In my district, all of the reports I've gotten are either that the police never showed up or they didn't show up for an hour and a half until the shooters were out of ammunition. And of course they didn't hear any gunfire because they'd run out of bullets. So that was another thing I heard from the people who were sitting up here last night on the ZAC. So, and it seemed to be that there are so many things wrong with the ordinance. How can we approve it? It's just a mess. And the idea of sending these things to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Really. Now, PEP told us that the ZBA was so overwhelmed with parking modifications that we needed to do away with our parking minimums, and we did that. So that was because the ZBA was overburdened. Now, this was PEP employees saying this. So now we're going to let the ZBA take on hundreds of special exception requests. And I believe pretty quickly it will just become a rubber stamp. You know, like you want a special, sure, why not? The only people that get notified of ZBA cases are the ones whose property touches the one in question. So the rest of the neighborhood that's disturbed by these things and affected, they don't even know what's going on because we don't tell them. So there was a lot. I think the ZAC really wanted to approve it. You know, the motion was to approve, but nobody voted to approve because it was just, you know, it was just hard to get your arms around how it would work in reality as opposed to how it would work on paper, because it sounds really good, but, you know, you've got all these things that require enforcement. Does anybody think enforcement will happen? I mean, realistically. So you know, I feel like that we definitely need an ordinance. Heck, we need a definition of bedroom. What's a bedroom? Y'all wrote this thing. What's a bedroom?
It's not defined in this ordinance.
Well, why not?
We didn't think it was necessary to define a bedroom.
Well, what I understand about some of these places is that they're putting bedrooms in basements and hallways and all kinds of rooms where beds don't go normally, but it's so they can advertise that they have 16 beds or 20 beds, or we talk about the owner of the property first has to obtain a permit. And then later on in the same ordinance, we say written permission from the property owner to apply for a permit. So who's applying for the permit? The owner or someone else? So we ask for the number of off-street parking spaces available for use by the renters and the location of trash enclosures, but we don't have any parking requirements. Where are the parking requirements? Because we have the new ordinance that did away with parking minimums, and if you are renting out a house that doesn't have a driveway or a garage, where is this parking going to be? Nowhere.
We didn't, our regulations state that the parking must be in accordance with what was approved by the city council in the zoning ordinance in May.
Well, if you
So
go back
we
and look
don't-
at it, not much of a requirement is there, and we have lots of neighborhoods chock-a-block with these things. I know I've told you, I have a street that has 12 on it, and the street's only 3 blocks long. Now, those houses don't have driveways or parking places, and those residents park on the street.
Do you
Guess what?
have that street address, Counselor Abbott? We've heard that several times, but no one has turned it over to us for enforcement, and we would be more than happy to investigate that
What would you
street.
enforce?
We do have other zoning regulations if the violations violate the current zoning ordinance or other code enforcement. We want to investigate and see if there's anything we can do.
I'll get you a list.
We would love that. Thank you.
Because the UAB professor who complained about it, he's documented what's going on his street. And of course, he's upset because he doesn't have any neighbors anymore.
I did want to clarify your question, asking about the owner or the EAB. under the ordinance, under what's proposed as 1223-5B, it allows the owner or the short-term rental manager to apply. So if the manager's applying, they would have to have the permission of the owner to apply for it. So it all goes back, but that would be the question that you asked first.
Okay, so 1223-4 says owner of the property first has to obtain a permit. So, maybe consistency would be good. So the short-term rental unit must not change the residential character of the premises that it occupies or adversely affect the character of the surrounding neighborhood. Who makes that decision?
We have that in other sections of the zoning ordinance for other uses. So that statement is intended to mean that as far as signage is concerned, you wouldn't have signs all over the property indicating that it's a short-term rental, and you wouldn't tear down a house and build a structure that is not in character with the other houses in the neighborhood. For example, in a historic district.
Gotcha. Well, we've got that going on now. So accessory dwelling units may not be used as short-term rentals. Why in heaven's name not? Everything else is fair game.
Yeah, we're working on some updates to the accessory dwelling units citywide. So that will come after this. So it may be amended at a later date, but at this time we did not include them as part of this regulation.
Well, one of the residents who came last night said that she had turned her accessory dwelling unit into a short-term rental. So is she going to lose that opportunity? Are y'all supposed to not answer anymore? Is that what the directive was? Because you can just tell me.
No, ma'am, we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, well, I have lots of questions because I feel like this needs a lot of work. And last night at the meeting, no resident was in favor of doing these things to our people except the ones who were operating short-term rentals. That was a very pointed thing that I noticed. And all of the people that were filled with enthusiasm are the people who are making money off of them in our residential zoned neighborhoods. So that was just notable. I know, my 3 minutes is up.
I just want to make sure that we have opportunity for other questions.
Yeah, well, we don't want to run out of time.
Counselor Smith?
Anyway, but I do have one other question, and that is, when this makes it to the Planning and Zoning Committee, is there someone in the law department that's willing to work with us on the key concerns that residents have? Because we haven't addressed the key concerns of residents in this ordinance. So I know you can't answer for the law department, and the law department is tied up over there.
I apologize, Counselor. Yeah, no, I mean, I think I told both you and Counselor O'Quinn, that there are some other, I don't think we're done, and we've heard what's been said, and we're willing to continue to work with the council on, how this is shaped.
Good, thank you.
Well, I was gonna say, I may just email you all my questions and comments, just because it's probably easier right now. And I guess at the next meeting, I'll just get feedback from it and we can just go from there.
Mr.
Hopefully we can do it for all of us.
Counselor Clark?
Yeah, this has become quite a hot topic, as was already said. And I do feel strongly we got to do something because, they're just proliferating unchecked. And I'm just wondering, regardless of what we end up with, to try to get some control over this thing, this phenomena that's sweeping through our neighborhoods, how are we going to staff up operationally? Because it just strikes me that whatever we enact, we got to go at it, and it's going to keep us pretty busy for a while till we can get, and then we got to design new processes and applications and inspections, and so what is the staffing model look like for
Yeah.
even all the stuff this implies?
And Counselor, that's something that does have to be considered, and with permits, there would be fees for those permits. They are, generally under Alabama case law, municipalities can charge administrative fees that relate to the services that are being provided and, to what administrative work we have to do. So that would be something to be looked at as to how that can help with concerns about staffing enforcement. Obviously, that's something I can't really answer. That's, a question for the administration, but I do want to see us look at this and other ordinances as we pass them. Ordinances aren't silver bullets that fix issues. We've got to think about how we're going to implement and use those ordinances.
Yeah, because nothing will be different after we pass this if we haven't put a whole lot of other operational stuff in place.
And if I may, I did want to give you kind of a bigger overview. I mean, currently, we have no real definition of, in our ordinances of what a short-term rental is. We have, because most of the websites, they will not share information because of the federal privacy laws. The platforms are just information sharing, similar to other social media sites. They have the same, protection from revealing your information, your personal information. They can't just give us a list of who operates for them. If you go on the websites, usually you have to get to the point of booking to figure out actually where that house is. I mean, Ms. Pearl and I have spent several hours when we had some unfortunate events, that we spent hours trying to figure out exactly where is this house, which one is this, and everything to try to figure out. So we know what we're asking about. So part of this is also to help us get a handle. We know we have a lot out there. We don't know for sure where they are, or, unless they're ones we're gotten complaints on. And the number that we know we've gotten complaints on are a very tiny fraction of what we think the entire population is out there.
So we'd have to do a study almost.
Yeah, and it also, this gives us some handle to have and know who they are, and hopefully weed out some bad actors from.
But it strikes me that any homeowner anywhere could become one weekend and not be one the next weekend. I mean, so there's that, because some people do it while they're on vacation or
I can tell you, I mean, we've been looking, and there are probably about as many approaches to regulating them as there are cities in this country. Everybody has something different. That's why we felt, what we really need is to figure out, we can talk about what everybody else is doing, but it's what Birmingham, what works for Birmingham in all aspects. And believe me, we do hear, what the citizens are saying, and that's what, we want to have tight regulations. But right now, the ability to know what's out there and deal with them, is an issue. And you're correct. There's some cities that we looked at that had tiered permitting. Like you said, somebody who, operated like less than 90 nights a year were treated, had one level of regulation. If it was like 90 to 180, they had higher regulations. If it was more than 180 nights that they might rent the house, they had higher regulations. There are other ways of doing tiered models and handling them differently. So,
and is there any specific training for law enforcement as it relates to short-term rentals that whether we pass something or not that we need to be doing? Because one of the complaints has been I mean, I know Counselor Abbott brought it up, but, you know, say if there were squatters in a property, they would say, you know, we can't remove the squatters until the owner comes and trespasses them out or whatever. But we've had Airbnb owners say they try, you know, they canceled someone's reservation who was a bad actor and they couldn't get any help removing the people, even though that's an owner saying, help me get these people out of my house. So how do we close that gap in terms of, you know, being clear on what our law enforcement can do and not do, and us all know what that is?
And we have had some discussions with BPD about, you know, at a high level about this ordinance, and we'll continue to have some discussion with them. I do know of one thing, you know, Airbnb has provided information. They have a program working with local law enforcement. And, you know, so there are platforms, you know, that's just an example. I don't know what the other platforms have, but we've been shown that Airbnb has an outreach to work with local law enforcement. So there's some ways to work for the police to work with the platforms to deal with that too, to know, you know, what's going on in situations. So.
Okay, I'm gonna ask, what I think is another thing that was asked a lot last night, but, you know, I don't think anybody got a sufficient response. We have short-term rental owner-operators who have come down here to City Hall and obtained a business license specifically for what they are doing. And they're in residential neighborhoods. If we, you know, enact zoning or a code that says, you know, they're excluded from where they are located, how do we deal with that? I mean, I know you guys are sensitive about the terminology, but for all intents and purposes, from a layman's standpoint, they are legal. You know, the city is not taking action against them. They've got a business license for what they've been doing. You know, and by enacting a law, you know, do we effectively shut them down, or do they become a legal non-conforming use?
And again, because I want to be careful, because, you know, we have potential litigation from all kinds of directions, you know, in this. There is some case law that I think is, you know, that I feel good about, you know, what we do. There are a lot of hosts that are asking, that are saying, we've made this investment, we've done this. And I would say the business license that is issued is just the general property rental license, the same as any long-term rental property owner gets. So there's no distinction at this time as to what business, like with a permit, we'll carve those out, and that would be distinguished. Right now, it's just general property rental is the license that's issued. But, you know, there's some case law that I think is supportive. You know, there would be a question policy-wise, I think, for the council, you know, to consider as to how we implement, you know, what we allow. One reason for having the regulations, the regulatory piece is not in the zoning ordinance, is to avoid creating that with you know, when we put these in, they're currently not a defined use in the zoning ordinance. And so you have the potential for creating legal nonconforming uses once they comply with everything. But it's, again, you know, nuanced issues, and So there's a difference as to whether, and a special exception generally does not run with the land like a variance would. So it's more like a permit, it's gonna require renewal, it's not there forever, like a variance would be.
Okay. So, what are your, y'all are gonna have to forgive me because apparently I have a different, way of processing information, and I allow myself to, for my opinions to evolve over time, based on the information, that I'm getting in. But, and I'm saying that because the last time we had this conversation, I, felt at the time pretty strongly that the, special exception process, might be helpful. I don't know if I'm, I think my position on that is evolving. And I'm also concerned about the point that Councilor Abbott raised about the zoning board of adjustment, having all of these cases, before them, and, the way that they deal with them. And, you also introduce the element of neighborhood politics, coming into it and influencing the situation. So, it's got a host of challenges that come with it as well. So, if we do decide to exclude them from, those areas and not, and remove the special exception process, I think this implementation question is like super important, and we've got to drill down on this. And I just don't see, I don't know, I'm kind of speaking for other folks too, but I don't know that we get to a place where we're comfortable, adopting something if we don't understand how it's going to be rolled out. Council Williams.
So to that point, and the point that Ms. Clark made, and to my original question to you about the legality of criminal charges, municipal criminal charges, I really also would like to see something that in an ordinance that was a blueprint of response for BPD. And what I mean by that is this, and I'm taking an abstract example of something that could have happened at an Airbnb. The owner sees that there's an issue. The owner calls BPD, whether it's through the platform's engagement of problem properties, which I've read about on Airbnb, or it's just the owner calling BPD, asking them to remove the tenants from the house, that there be an actual blueprint in the, or black and white, this is what, it is unlawful to remain in the ordinance. It doesn't, I understand that trespassing and with the state constitution, but we can also have, other things that are spelled out that say BPD shall remove tenants once they have been trespassed by the owner and or the platform or whatever we're calling it, through their center if the owner calls the platform and whatever. But that response really has to be spelled out in the ordinance. If it's not, it's going to be enforced like the noise ordinance is. And we've been able, before we even talk about the council outlining response by BPD, if we're talking, if you're about to say anything about the Mayor Council Act, we did it with trash. We specifically outlined when or how the mayor's administration shall pick up trash on a certain number of days and recycling a certain number of days. So it's been done. And I think that we really have to outline that.
I see your point, and to answer, because I think Councilor Clark mentioned about trespassing and squatters and different things, so just to, clarify, and to Councilor O'Quinn's point, to be, picky a little bit about terminology, Alabama has a Uniform Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. That act preempts municipal regulation of, the agreements between landlords and tenants. It does not apply to hotels, motels, or other transient lodging. So, and that's, some of the hosts last night pointed out, I can get rid of a short-term renter easier than I can a long-term renter because they are not subject to the eviction process. So some of this is an education process. If they can trespass that person, and then of course we have the new squatters law that's being implemented, but I don't know how that's going to apply with a short-term rental. It does not apply to somebody who's got a rental agreement under the Landlord-Tenant Act. So not sure how that's going to shake out, but that has given another mechanism than just trespassing somebody when they're squatting. So, but there is a distinction between somebody who is considered a tenant under the Landlord-Tenant Act and somebody who's just a short-term renter guest.
So I guess my third point of all the same issue, which I know I'm belaboring, but I don't want, if there's a problem, I want the police to be able to solve it that night. I don't want it to go to City Hall, to the law department, then to let's get enforcement, and then by that time as Ms. Abbott said, someone's unloaded, 1,000 rounds in the neighborhood, and New Year's Eve is over the next day. So I want there to be an outline of immediate enforcement by BPD in an ordinance like this, because I don't think that if it's outlined, I think that if we rely on just Alabama Criminal Code, we know it supersedes everything we do, but I think if we rely on that, then we're going to find ourselves with a noise ordinance enforcement situation. So thank y'all both very much for working on something that's contentious. It's not fun.
Great suggestion, Council Williams. Thank you, Council Abbott.
One other thing that was brought up last night, and by, believe it or not, someone who works for the census, PEP staffers have told us that we have a housing shortage in Birmingham, and that's why we need to increase the density of all of our neighborhoods. So when we turn all of these dwellings and apartments into short-term rentals, and the census worker knocks on the door with their form and wants the person in it to fill it out, they will say, no, I live in Kentucky. So we're taking up our housing with people who don't live here, and we're concerned about becoming the third or fourth largest city in the state instead of just the second largest. So how does this comport with our desire to give people places to live, and especially people who are renting, and when their house in, say, Druid Hills or maybe Fountain Heights gets bought out by someone who wants to make it into a short-term rental because there's a new amphitheater coming. And the poor people who are renting that house get booted out. Where are they going? I can move to the burbs. If they're paying $250 a month for a place to live, they're not moving to the suburbs unless it's a pretty bad suburb. So it just strikes me that we're not being fair to the low-income people by allowing just willy-nilly any property that someone wants to buy to be turned into a short-term rental, and the people in there then don't have a place to live. Well, they may find something, or they may end up under a bridge abutment, or they might be in Magnolia Park in a tent, or George Ward Park in a tent. So Isabel Rubio last night asked, who do we want to be in Birmingham? Do we want to take care of our visitors first or our residents first? And I think that's something that, you know, this ordinance, how we're going to make it address that issue of fairness. Because if you've got plenty of money, you can move anywhere you want. You know, you sell your house, take that big fistful of dollars you're going to get and go to some other place. But if you don't have a fistful of dollars, it's just something to think about. But the census person is coming back. So I guess that's for the administration to think about. The census workers are coming back and they're going to count who's left here. And there may not be very many people left.
Okay, so just for clarification, as it's presented to us tonight, they would only be allowed in D1 through D4 and in whatever UN is by special exception.
Urban neighborhood.
Urban neighborhood, yes, all right. So,
Yes, sir, that's correct.
yes, so they would only be allowed there by special exception there, you know, and this is a ongoing conversation. We're trying to figure out what's gonna be the best thing. So if we remove special exception, then they're not allowed in those zone districts.
Right, we would need to actually put on the table that they are not permitted. So you wouldn't just leave it out of the ordinance. You
Right,
would have
right.
to, for all
Exactly.
those districts, you would put an X.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, come on.
It's, why didn't we allow them in industrial zones? I'm just wondering.
You can't have
No.
residential.
We don't allow them in industrial districts because we don't allow residential uses.
I just was wondering what.
Yeah, the old, you're thinking of the M districts, the older ones, they did allow
Yeah,
residential.
okay, I got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
but the new zoning classifications for industrial don't allow residential anymore,
I was just curious, thank you.
which we probably should have done a while ago.
Counselor Clark, did you have a question? Counselor Clark?
Remember what I was going to say.
All right.
Mr. President.
Counselor Chaz?
Because I know a lot of questions are being asked, and it's kind of like piling. Because I don't know how long you want staff to stay, but we will offer, if the council has any more questions after this meeting, that you just relay them down to Ms. Camila, and we'll do our best to try and get them answered.
Yeah, understood. I mean, for me, at least, it's helpful to have an open discussion, you know, because I care about what my colleagues think, and I care about what staff thinks, and, you know, the implementation questions and everything. So hearing other people's input helps my position evolve. So I think these conversations are really important. That being said,
Just
any more
offering.
questions? Counselor Clark?
I mean, I keep thinking about how is this going to change things? And I think about all the people in my district who probably don't know what a zoning code or building code is, and they're doing whatever they want to do right now with any land they can get their hands on. And some of it, we shut them down, and, I mean, if it's obvious, when we drive by that, you know, that shed shouldn't be a primary structure or whatever, But I don't know, I guess I just don't have a lot of confidence that once we finally get something passed, it's gonna make a difference in what people do. That's my
Unless
sadness.
it's codified in the ordinance on an outprint of how BPD should respond that night.
Okay, and then the other thing is, when people violate it, what happens?
That's, then again, there was some discussion, and we've had in various meetings that we've had, with the public, we've had a number of meetings. Everybody's, will propose, oh, okay, well, you need to fine them $5,000 or whatever. The city does not have the authority to issue civil fines. The municipal court's jurisdiction to issue fines for a municipal ordinance violation is up to $500 per violation per day, or up to 180 days in jail. That said, there are a few specific crimes that the Alabama legislature has carved out that can have a higher penalty. Those are set out in statute. So, but in general, and there are a few that the legislature has carved out where there are some civil penalties, but those are very, very few. I really only know of one. With direct enforcement through municipal court that it would allow a civil penalty. So, currently that's, the limitation, but it's per violation per day. There's the option of, with the revocation of the permit and the business license for violations, for continued, nuisances. So, there's still that, there's that arm of enforcement that would be available through the council.
And, yeah, but on that same point, one of the things that was pointed out last night was, yes, there are several municipalities in the Birmingham metro area that have elected to not allow them. However, if you go on the short-term rental listing sites, they're all over in those municipalities. So, enforcement is a challenge, Councilor Clark.
So, to some of the points that have been made previously, and I feel like we talked about this the first time you all came, trying to regulate saturation, and like for adult establishments, I know there's a distance requirement, it can't be this close to a this and this close to a that, and but I've seen it regulated, certain types of uses regulated to that extent. I think you gave us a reason why that, like you're on the business license renewal, somebody might beat you to it kind of thing. And I don't know, but it seems like there should be a way to control saturation in an area so that.
There are some ordinances we've looked at where some cities have done that, and I'll let Ms. Pearl speak to that because she's talked to a couple of them. Part of it becomes, I think what you're getting to is the question of how do we do it? How do we start it? You start fresh. Is it everybody that shows up? They show up at midnight on January 1st, camping out in front of City Hall to get in. That, and then if we're going to have the renewal requirement, how is that going to affect, there's a lot of issues. It's something that's not off the table, but again, it's how do you implement, how do you enforce?
I'm about to have a motion whenever
Okay.
you're ready. Sure.
Now, this is just a question. We have 1,000-foot spacing for communal living. That would stop the congestion on a street that has 12 on it.
We did consider that, Counselor Abbott, and like Attorney Bernard said, it's not off the table. Our biggest question as a staff is kind of what she just kind of spoke about is how do you start? Is it January 1st, the first people that line
I think
up
the
outside
raffle, I think
City
the lottery
Hall?
idea was a good one.
Yeah, there are some cities that have done a lottery.
I mean, that's how we give away football tickets. Lottery.
And I'll say, I've seen litigation over lottery systems in these ordinances, and in fact, today, I was on the internet looking for something, I found, I think, within the last 24 to 48 hours, 3 cities that are either considering regulations or being sued over their new regulations. So it is a continually evolving issue that's going on how to deal.
Well, we know the lawyers will get rich. They always do.
Except the city.
We'll have some more conversations with those cities that have done a lottery and the spacing requirements and see if they have any words of wisdom that they could share.
All right.
I have a motion to adjourn.
All in favor, say aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.